Hi, this is Adrienne Jeanette. I'm the Associate Curator of Collections and Education with the University Museums here on campus. And today I'm going to very quickly present a group of both French and French adjacent objects for your class, French 305. That we've worked with Dr. Michelle Shaw, your professor, multiple times to kind of present different objects from our collection. So the first object I have right here is obviously a lamp that works. We've had kind of the electricity, the electrical cord worked on, so it properly works. And this lamp is glass, as you can tell, because you can see through it, but it's a little bit opaque. And it is by a glassmaker, a French glassmaker named Émile Gallé. And so we have quite a few of Gallé's glass, pieces of Gallé's glass in our collection. And this is nice because it's a different variation of not just a vase or some of the other forms, it's an actual lamp form. And the metal work and the bronze work would have been done also by the manufacturer or by adjacent workers working within the manufacturer. And so this is a type of glass, this is around the turn of the century, called cameo glass. And as you can see, it's different layers of glass, and so that's something that you can look into when you're researching this object. And Gallé was born and raised in Nancy, France, and he worked there for most of his life, and he was very important in the Art Nouveau movement in creating glass that used nature as its inspiration, and he's probably one of the best-known French glassmakers, especially of this period, but probably ever that's been known. And he was very prolific, so he was quite an important glassmaker, but unfortunately died quite early, and so we didn't get to see the full breadth of his creations. So here we have another piece of glass, but this is an American glassmaker, but the same time frame as the Gallé lamp we just looked at. This fluoroform vase was made around 1904. And it was by an American glassmaker named Louis Comfort Tiffany. His father, Charles Tiffany, started what you probably know of as the Tiffany jewelry and silver purveyor that still exists today. And Louis Comfort Tiffany was an artist and really, really interested in very different types of art and very inspired by nature and antiquity. And found his way into making glass, and specifically stained glass and blown objects. And this is one of his you always know Tiffany glass when you see it. It's got this beautiful gold iridescence, and that was taken from ancient glass. And the shapes were often inspired by both nature and antiquity. So this beautiful vase would have been something made by hand and blown by a glassmaker and then sold at different department stores or through Tiffany and Tiffany and Company. Now we have a small cup and saucer that you can see, and this is actually made of soft paste porcelain. So it's made by the Saint-Cloud factory that began around 1690, and that factory was the first time that any type of porcelain body had ever been made in France and probably much of the continent of Europe. Porcelain was made primarily in China and Japan, and it was imported to Europe, and people adored it and were obsessed with it and wanted to create their own porcelain, but they weren't sure what the secret was. And so when I say soft paste porcelain, it's actually missing the key element of clay, kaolin clay, that makes it true porcelain or hard paste porcelain that was being imported from Asia. But it's still quite beautiful on its own, and that type of porcelain wouldn't be figured out until about 1708-09 in Germany. And so Saint-Cloud was the first factory creating this. And this little cup and saucer was probably made around 1735, and they made very much imitations of blue and white porcelain from China, along with using metal shapes, so shapes of silverware to create in ceramic form. And then also the whiteware is taken directly from China, where they had different types of pure white ceramics and porcelain. And again, this kind of beautiful inspiration by nature. And the factory would actually close around 1760 because of competition. This is a print, and it's an image from a play by the French writer and playwright Molière. Molière lived in the 17th century, but this print was made in about 1860, just speaking to the longevity of his art form and how popular he was and how important he was as a writer in France. And this is from one of his plays, and it was called The Doctor in Spite of Himself. And that whole play, you can probably find a little bit more out about that information for this play. But it's a scene from there where you see this is the gentleman who's supposedly a doctor dressed up in this funny black outfit, which doesn't quite look like our doctors today, and what he's doing. And Molière was very much talking about the issues of society and culture in a lot of the work he did. And he's probably the most important playwright in France, especially of his period. And so to have a prints are very accessible. So then you could read the play or read his writings and see images later on next to it that would then visually illustrate what you were reading. Here we have a very interesting piece of glass. This is American, probably made around 1886 and after. And I know it's probably a little hard to see, but if you look closely, you can see that it has the Statue of Liberty on it. And so this is American press glass, and it's pretty much a souvenir piece when you think about it. The Statue of Liberty is technically a French woman object, work of art, given by the country of France to America. And it was conceived of in about 1860s, and of course didn't make it to America until 1886, when it was installed and dedicated, but it was to honor the centennial, so 1876, the 100 years of the American independence. And so you get very interesting souvenir glasses like this. And I think the most fun thing about this is that it's a pickle jar. And so just imagine having your pickles in this beautiful or kind of funky looking Statue of Liberty glass in your house. You could do it and have it on your own. Here we have a bust of Napoleon, which everyone usually can recognize his image when they see it, but it's actually an English object, not French. And it's both bronze for the bust, and then if you look at the bottom here, it is ceramic. So this type of ceramic was made by Wedgwood. Wedgwood was started by Josiah Wedgwood in the 18th century, and he was an incredible scientist, potter, businessman, and humanitarian. And he created this really amazing pottery company. And one of his most important, and probably his most important foundings or creations was this body called jasperware. It's a type of stoneware, but you probably recognize it. It's usually a pale blue with this white decoration. This one, you've got the dark blue with purple with the white decoration. And at that time when he was making it, neoclassicism was the most important style. And so you see that continuation of neoclassical style, even though this object's from the late 19th century. And Napoleon obviously lived around, he was crowned himself emperor in 1804, but around the late 19th century, there was a revival in neoclassicism and neoclassical decoration and design. And so if you look at the bottom and see the griffins with the lyres, if you look at the decoration on the jasperware, it's all very neoclassical, referring to antiquity and talking about this very classical style of design and imagery. And so Napoleon himself was both an interesting character and one who was venerated but also hated by many. So it's an interesting thing to think, why would you still want to put him on a bust 90 years later? And now we have more glass. We have a lot of glass in our collection, and this is, again, pressed glass, but this is French pressed glass. So the glass press was actually invented in America in around the 1820s, but it then went to England and throughout Europe, and the French were quite adept at using the glass press. And so a glass press made glass making much easier and faster, as you can imagine, rather than hand blowing each piece of glass. You were able to put it into a machine that you then pressed the form and the pattern into the glass. And here, these two pieces, the mug and the tray, are made by Baccarat. Baccarat is one of the oldest glass manufacturers. It was started in the late 18th century. And it continued to today, where it's still open, and they have very fancy hotels now, but was always making lead crystal glass. So this is very high quality glass too. And it's very heavy because lead's in it, but the good thing about lead is it makes things shiny and brilliant. And so that's why it was used in glass, especially cut glass. And so these have elements that look like they're cut, but they're actually pressed, meaning you can make multiples very quickly rather than hand cutting or hand blowing each piece of glass. And here we have more glass that doesn't quite look like glass. The bottom is actually metal, but the top, which I'm more interested in talking about, is a type of glass called pâte de verre. So it almost kind of translates to glass paste. And this glass was made by creating this almost like frit that you would then layer. And so this is quite heavy. You would layer the colors and the different in this kind of pattern and mold and cast. So casting glass is similar to casting other metals and things like that you might have heard of before. And so then you would place it into the kiln and it would fire, and then you would get rid of the mold, and you would have your piece of glass. So it's not translucent at all like glass you would normally assume. It's quite opaque because it's this kind of pasty, sandy material. And here we've got some very interesting decoration of cockroaches with their big antenna. Again, this is Art Nouveau period, so this is talking about nature and inspiration in all forms of nature, including bugs. And the artist Amalric Walter was very well known and probably one of the best that used this type of glass, this form of glass making in the early 20th century. And our last object is a painting. And this painting is by the American artist N.C. Wyeth, or Noel Convers Wyeth. And he is the father of a very artistic family that included his son Andrew Wyeth and his grandson Jamie, who is still making art. And this painting is from a series of 12 called America in the Making. And this series of paintings was made in preparation for a calendar. And the company that ordered this calendar is from Ottumwa, Iowa, the John Morrell Meat Company. And they actually asked for these designs for a calendar that they could then promote. And then once they had the calendar and they had these works of art, they then donated it to the museums, which is wonderful, right at the time. These were made around 1938-39. They were donated in 1940. And this artist, N.C. Wyeth, was very well known for being an illustrator of many different books like Treasure Island, and so his artwork was very well known, seen by many, and very narrative in its style. And this is an image of Jacques Marquette. And America in the Making had a series of 12, starting from the founding Coronado and the Spanish conquistadors, and ending with Abraham Lincoln. But it's interesting to think of why he chose these different moments in the history of America to represent America in the Making. So Jacques Marquette was one of those months.